set the master link clip over the forward pin and slide backwards. With a pair of needle nose and some safety glasses, you can push the clip in. Now we can go ahead and very lightly tighten our axle nut. Make sure your tire and wheel assembly is pushed all the way forward. Just snug up the axle nut so it is hard to move by hand. Now we can adjust our chain slack. With the tire moved all the way forward, there's way too much chain slack. With our axle nut slightly tightened, we can still adjust the adjuster bolt and move the axle. You want to move both adjusters out equally. If you do not know the OEM specification for your chain slack, the good old-fashioned rule is 3 fingers. You can use 3 fingers, push down on the chain in the middle of the chain, and then up on the chain. You only want the chain to move the width of 3 fingers. But on this bike, we actually have the OEM spec right on the side of the swing arm. We want to continue adjusting our adjusters outwards until we achieve our proper chain slack. And remember, you want to adjust both tensioners equally. Also take note, on most bikes there will be hash marks on the swing arm and on your spacer on the axle. These hash marks are to get your proper rear wheel alignment. Now remember, your hash marks will be on the left side of the swing arm, also on the right. You want to set both hash marks to the same position. And also you can double check by measuring from your center of your axle to the center of your swing arm pivot. This will give you perfect rear wheel alignment. You want to make sure the measurement is the same on both the left and right side of the bike. Once you have your proper chain slack and your adjusters are both equally out and your rear wheel alignment is correct, we can go ahead and tighten our axle nut. One good way to make sure our axle is tight with our adjusters is to use a Phillips screwdriver, install it into the rear sprocket, and rotate the rear tire backwards until tight. This draws the axle forward into the adjusters. Once tight, you want to make sure you torque your axle nut to the proper specification. Once our axle's tight, we can remove our screwdriver and we can go ahead and lock down our adjuster nuts. Simply use one wrench to hold the adjuster and the other to lock down the nut. You want to make sure you do this to both sides. Lastly, we can go ahead and install our countershaft sprocket bolt. You want to use some Loctite on the threads. And just tighten down. And now we can go ahead and lower the bike back down onto our ramp. And if needed, hold the rear brake so we can torque our sprocket bolt. With our rear tire down, I'm going to go ahead and firmly tighten. Now I'm going to go ahead and torque to our proper specifications. You may want to use a small amount of Loctite. That way it does not come off and get tangled up into your chain. And go ahead and install. Checking your swing arm bearings, your shock linkage bearings, or your shock heim joint bearing. Checking your linkage bearing or your shock bearings, you would simply grab a hold of the swing arm and wiggle it or move it up and down. If you notice any notchingness or free play in the swing arm, the bushings or bearings could be bad in your linkage. Checking your swing arm bearings, you want to take the swing arm and rock it side to side. If you notice any play, your swing arm bearings need to be replaced. Let's look at the difference between a new tire and a used, worn-out tire. As you can see, the new tire has very deep, squared-off treads. The knobs are all intact. The worn-out tire, the knobs are worn down, rounded off on one edge, and in some places, the knobs are either broke off or ripping off. Also, if your tire is old, the rubber will be dry rotted and cracking. As you can see with the side view, these treads are very worn as opposed to these brand new ones. If you're just removing your wheel assembly from the bike and taking the assembly down to your local shop to have them change your tire, a couple things you want to take note. If it has removable spacers, remove the spacers, or take your axle, put the axle through, and the nut on both sides. That way, you make sure that both spacers are on their proper sides, and then also the axle keeps them from falling off. If you're going to be changing a lot of your own tires, it's a good idea to try to make yourself a tire changing bucket or stand. You can use a 30 to 35 gallon drum, cut the top off, use some heater hose, and zip tie it to the top ring. You see I've bolted some hooks into the side of the bucket. That way I can use some tie downs and tie down my rim to the bucket. And also I fill the bucket 1/3 the way with concrete to make it nice and sturdy.